Justice UU Lalit, who appeared on give the lecture virtually, Justice Roshan Dalvi, Percy Bilamoria, Dr. Bharadwaj, Vinod, Surana, Mrs. Surana, distinguished members of the audience. Sorry, we're running late, so I'm not mentioning more names. It's not a cliche, but I'm really, really overwhelmed to be the first recipient of this memorial award. I must thank the jury. I must thank Bits Pilani for conferring on me this award. And what makes it so special is that it is in memory of Mr. Fali Nariman, whom I had the privilege of working with in quite a few cases. Dr. Bharadwaj told me that I should speak on what were the lessons I learned as a lawyer working with Fali Nariman. And this could be of great use to the young students who are, some of you are going to be the Fali Narimans, the Soli Swarabjis, the Palkiwalas of the future in the years to come. Actually, it's a slightly emotional moment for me because exactly a year ago, January 21st to be precise, that I had my last meeting with Fali Nariman. I'm normally in Delhi from Tuesday to Thursday. I'm never there on the weekend. But there's a wedding of a very dear friend's daughter, which I couldn't miss. And I had met Mr. Nariman a few months earlier, and something told me that I should go and see him. So the wedding was in the evening, and as all of you know, Delhi weddings are invariably late also. So I thought that why not I take the earlier flight and spend half an hour with Mr. Nariman. So I sent him a mail a week earlier and said that, sir, I'm coming for the wedding. It's at 6 o'clock. And the reception is at 6 o'clock. Can I come and have a cup of tea with you and see you? If tea is not convenient, what time will be convenient to see you? I've still got his mail. He said, dear Arvind, come anytime you want. It'll be lovely to see you. That's a two-line mail. So I changed my flight and I went earlier. And what was expected to be a half an hour meeting, we spent 2.5 hours chatting of various things in life. He was an absolute, in his old spirit, telling me stories about Mullah and what happened in the Bombay High Court and so on. And little did I know that 2 or 3 weeks later, he'd be no more. And I would have cursed myself if I had not taken the trouble of going and seeing him at the last point of time. And then in the January 21st, 2024, which is exactly a year earlier. I had the privilege of working with Mr. Nariman before the Excise Tribunal, before the Kerala High Court, before the Madras High Court, and before the Supreme Court, of course. We worked together. Contrary to what somebody said, he was not very mild or very patient. Those of us worked with him, we know that he had quite a temper in the conference. But there was something uniquely lovable and likable about Mr. Nariman. Now, what are his qualities? And the importance of recounting this on this occasion is that all of us learn from our predecessors who serve as role models. And the famous motivational speaker Zig Ziglar once said that success leaves clues. If a person has done a certain number of things, and if you follow him as a role model, the odds are very bright that you will reach the same result. If I ask you, and this is Zig Ziglar's example, if I ask you, what is 6 into 7, you'll tell me it's 42. If I ask you what is 12 into 8, you'll tell me it's 96. And if I tell you what is 243 into 346, you may not able to answer instantly, but given pen and paper, you'll come at the correct result. And the reason, Zig Ziglar says, is that you know the formula. Once you know the formula, then it's up to you to apply the same formula and you'll reach the same levels of success. And therefore, ever since I was a student in the Madras Law College, Palkhiwala was a role model to me. I also wanted to be a tax lawyer, so I did law in the morning, I did cost accounting in the evening. I couldn't do CA because it would require me to go several weeks out of Madras for audits. So I decided to do accounting in the evening. My goal was to learn accounting, so I'd be a good tax lawyer. And that's how I did it. And then I used to study the lives of these people. And one thing I'll recommend today to all youngsters, which you must do, is to read the biographies of these autobiographies and the biographies of these great lawyers. Before Memory Fades is fantastic. You must also read Roses in December. You must read Settleward's autobiography, Hidayatullah's autobiography, My Own Boswell, and so on. These are very, very important. According to me, they help me a lot in understanding how great people have reached that particular height. I was blessed because in the Madras Kanamala Library, which is one of the 3 national libraries in India, surprisingly, there is a huge shelf called legal biographies. And I made it a point to read virtually every one of them. And you'll be surprised, one of the fascinating autobiographies is by Kailashnath Kadju, the earlier law minister. Fabulous book. Then another book by Rufus Isaacs, who became Lord Reading. He was the first Jew. He became Lord Chief Justice and then took the title of Lord Reading. He became Viceroy of India. And there's a famous person called R.F.E. Houston, who is a very common biographer. And in Rufus Isaacs' biography, I learned one lesson. His senior was Lawson Walton, and the senior told him that Rufus, be the first person to come to chambers and be the last person to leave. Because you never know, when a solicitor wants a work, he'll come to the chambers and he'll find you there and you may get a brief. But I learned some very important lesson from him. Rufus Isaacs made it a point to get up at 4 and work till 8 without a break. After 8, he would have his breakfast, bath, etc., go to court, work till 4:30, chambers 5:30, and then he would go to Parliament. He was a KC MP. So these are the various examples I keep studying, and I see how these people do it. Anthony Trollope was not a lawyer, but a great writer, the most prolific writer, and he had the habit of getting up at 5:30 and writing till 8:30 every single day. And you must read his autobiography, where he says that I wrote for 3 hours every day. He was the Postmaster General of England. He set up the post office in Egypt. He set up the post office in Mesopotamia. So he was a very busy man. He was just not just a writer. But he said by getting up at 5:30 and writing till 8:30, and it's very interesting how times have changed. He had a person who got £5 a year to give him a cup of tea every hour. And he used to write time 250 words per hour. And the remarkable thing is, he said, I never missed a deadline in my life, which I'm ashamed to say I've missed every deadline in my life. But he never missed a deadline in his life. And the best thing is the kind of dedication is fascinating. He was traveling by ship to Cairo, to Alexandria, and there was violent sea turbulence and got seasick. So he said, I would open the porthole, throw up, close it, and again start writing from 5:30 to 8:30. And the best joke was, the best part of the fascinating thing was, if he finished at 8:10, he would not stop. He'll start writing the next book. So the reason why I'm telling you is the importance of reading biographies is you get life lessons which you can implement. And these are the clues which tell you, dedicating 3 hours to writing and so on and so forth. Now, what do I learn from Mr. Nariman? I just jotted down the points because Dr. Baroda told me that this will be useful to the young students, some kind of an encouragement. Now, the first thing was, what I learned from him was outstanding court craft. In his book, in Memory Fades, he said a couple of times he was harsh, but I think Justice Dalvi would have seen him as a junior practicing in the Bombay High Court. He would be very, very impatient, irritable in conference, especially with the other solicitors and chartered accountants. He would express his anger. And but once we came to court, he never raised his voice. I've never seen him, at least in the matters I worked with him, never crossed swords with the court. Outstanding court craft. And this is a common trait among lawyers. The late Mohan Kumar Mangalam, who was also an outstanding barrister, lawyer in Madras, he always said that, remember, it is the lawyer's life, but the lawyer's bread and butter, but the client's life. You get nothing by irritating the court. So always be calm and patient. And I'll give you one example which is very, very important. I mentioned this in Orissa when I gave a lecture there. My senior, Mr. Natarajan, was Mohan's junior, Mohan Kumarangalam's junior. And used to always tell him, that don't try to portray your wisdom. We have to get success for the client in the most ethical way possible. So don't irritate the judge. Now, there is a famous case called R versus Islington in administrative law. All of us pronounce it as R versus Islington because island, so Islington. Now, Mohan Kumaramangalam had studied in England from the age of 10 and became a barrister at 25. So he virtually spoke like an Englishman and he lived in England for 14, 15 years. And actually, it's not Islington, it's a place called Islington. It's not Islington. So when he was the respondent counsel and lawyer after lawyer for the petitioner kept on saying, my lord knows R versus Islington, R versus Islington. And he would tell my senior, the guy doesn't know it's Islington. System, how do you know? He said, my dear chap, I've lived in England. I know it's Islington. So Justice Somasundaram was the judge. Then we started arguing. He said, what happened to that R versus Islington, R versus Islington? Then Mr. Mohan Kumarangalam's turn came and he said, my lord, as your lordship knows, the famous case of R versus Islington, R versus Islington. And then when they came out, my senior asked him, sir, you told me it's Islington, but you kept on repeating Islington. He says, what will I get by showing the judge is wrong? That's court craft. I have to get success for my client. I don't have to show off my knowledge that I know more than him. So that was the trait of Mr. Nariman. The way he would be very angry in the conference, but when we went to court, he was absolutely courtesy personified. Even if the judge made a completely off the irrelevant remark, he would simply smile, push it aside, and continue. So the first point which I noted was the court craft that he did. Second point which I learned was he spent enormous time on every case. It was not just a T20 match, just read something and go to court and argue. He took much fewer cases, that's what I noted. But he had extraordinary attention to detail. And I'll tell you, I've got examples. You see, normally in tax, if you're a tax lawyer, every assessment year is a unit, right? And because the time taken in our cases for the matter to reach the High Court or Supreme Court, by the time the case starts and reaches the High Court or Supreme Court, there are 8-9 assessment years are involved because cases keep piling up. Same matters are arising year after year. To the credit of Mr. Nariman, I found he would insist on seeing every assessment year, every commissioner's order, every tribunal's order. And I would say, why are we doing it? We know the first year and the last year, we know why bother. But to my surprise, we could get real nuggets of useful facts coming in between. So it was extraordinary attention to detail. And kindly note, when you practice, please remember the facts. I'll again tell a story of Mohan Kumarangalam. He was underground in the communist movement. He started practice late in 1953. And his father was the chief minister of Madras at one time. So Mohan met Chief Justice Mahajan and asked him, sir, what advice would you give to a young lawyer? And this is very, very important. And Chief Justice Mahajan told him, son, remember 3 things. First, study the judge, study the facts, and then if you have time, study the law. So this is the thing. So Nariman's quality was extraordinary attention to facts. Now the next point which I wanted to mention was, in his book he has mentioned that once Mr. Daftari came to his house for dinner in Bombay when he was a much younger lawyer. And Daftari told him that, look, pay attention to as much thinking as in preparing. That is, keep thinking about your case. And there are 2 parallels which I found here. In Hyderabad, we are doing a very, very important case for MRF. It was a case impacting all the tire companies. And we would meet in the evening. And I remember going into his suite. He had come in the morning and he was lying on the sofa and just thinking And I just kept quiet. And 8, 10 minutes, he was thinking about something and constantly point. And ever you sit outside the court also, he'll be thinking, making some notes, making some last minute changes. So he said, thinking about the brief is as important as reading. And I draw a parallel because one of the greatest lawyers I briefed was late R. Keshav Iyengar. You may not heard of him. He was Mr. Parasaran's father. Mr. Parasaran is now 97. Keshav Iyengar was born in 1900. I briefed him in 93 because he was like a role model to me. You see, in Madras Law College, after the emergency, we had 1 year of classes. But second year onward, we had frequent strikes. For some silly reason, there'll be a strike or there'll be some boycott. So, as Surana knows, the advantage of Madras High Court, it is just next to the law college is next to the High Court. So I had the privilege that moment the college went on strike, I would just rush and go to the High Court. And there I've heard Sirvai, I heard Mrudul, I heard Dr. Chitale, I heard Nariman himself in a sugar matter, and I would listen to all these arguments. But one person who impressed me immensely was Keshav Iyengar. He wore that full dhoti with a coat and a turban and so on. He was born in 1900. If you read 1 ITR page 3, it is Keshav Iyengar for the SSC and Patanjali Shastri for the commissioner. So that was his pedigree. So I briefed him in 93. It was a very, very important contempt case for against Indian Express. Ramnath Goenka, Saroj Goenka, BG Varghese, they all respondents. And it was my life dream that I said, if I've got an important case, I should brief Keshav Iyengar. Actually, in 84, I took a call, I won't brief anybody. But when this contempt case came and so many people were involved, I said, let me brief Keshav Iyengar. So he was not practicing, but through a friend's father, he agreed to practice for me. Now, two coincidences here. Fali Nariman got the Kinloch Forbes Medal for highest marks in Roman law and jurisprudence. I still remember my first meeting with Keshav Iyengar. I used to see him almost with veneration. So I came and sat next to him and he said, young man, when did you pass out? I said, so and so year. He said, do you know that there was no contempt in Roman law? I said, no, sir, we don't have Roman law in law college anymore. No Roman law? You are unfit to be a lawyer. That was his reaction. And now Roman law, I don't know what's the importance, but I think it's worth considering whether Roman law is good or not. Institute of Justinians are still very good. In terms of property, it's worth going to Roman law. But one lesson I learned from Keshav Iyengar on this thinking and reading, I used to give him a lot of case laws and contempt because it was a life and death matter for Express, Indian Express. He said, don't multiply authorities. He spoke with a Tamilian accent in his own slow way. He said, 60% reading, 40% thinking. Don't keep on reading case laws. Stop the reading and keep on thinking. And he told me a very important thing. He said, 48 hours before your case reaches, tie up the bundle and don't see it again, open it only in court. I've done it sometime, it's been very effective. But second thing of Nariman, which I mentioned, was thinking about the case was as important to him as reading his briefs. The third thing, which I must mention, which you learn as you start practicing, he had a unique system. I think Percy will know when you worked with him. He had a unique system of making list of dates. His unique system of making list of dates with connecting the page numbers. And he told me that when you prepare your SLP, the first para of your synopsis should be so important that the judge feels, yes, there's something to it. The first para is most important, and how to draft the grounds, he gave me some very good tips. But the point was attention to detail and chronologically arranging the list of dates was another unique feature which I have not seen in any other senior, which I worked with so many of them. Then, what I liked about him was he didn't take too many cases. His thing was meticulous preparation, and super presentation. I would classify him as meticulous preparation and super presentation. Now, very important, which I liked about him was he was never dogmatic, but also pragmatic. And I'll tell you one example. We did the NJAC together, National Judicial, the 99th Amendment. And the arguing counsel was Fali Nariman, Ram Jetmalani, Anil Diwan, and I was to argue the act. They took up the constitutional aspect, and I was allotted. The court said, "You please divide the work so nobody repeats." So I was allotted the task of the NJC Act 1999. And those of you who are law students will find that it is difficult to find a more badly drafted act than the NJC Act of 1999. It had 7 fatal flaws. People say NJC should not have been struck down. The act would have never been workable. But to Mr. Nariman's credit, he told the court that I am not for the collegium. Collegium is there, it has got its flaws. But this system is worse. And he said, if you bring in the same recommendations done by the National Review Committee headed by Justice Venkatchalaya, we will withdraw the petition. He made a bold statement that we are not dogmatic. We want a system where the best possible judges are selected. This kind of predominance of the executive with the veto power, etc., will not work. But what was important was he knew ultimately what he wanted and was not dogmatic but pragmatic. Lastly, what I liked was his sense of values. And it has been mentioned that he resigned as the additional Solicitor General of India. My senior told me that when you're the Advocate General, you're not the Advocate General for the ruling party, you're Advocate General for the state, a distinction very often lost. You're not the mouthpiece for the ruling party, you're the Advocate General for the state. You must see what the state's interests are the most important. And that was reflected by both Mr. Nariman as ASG to resign, because he had come from Bombay. And suppose he had resigned, it was a difficult thing. Some people may not brief him because of fear prevailed in the emergency. There was a fear element. Yet all his family had shifted. Now again to go back to Bombay was a thing, but he took a bold and courageous decision. The other thing which I liked was, similarly, in 2017, they introduced all the tribunals were amended through the money bill. And now it's pending before 9 judges. And we said money bill can't include anything than finance. He took the courage of signing a representation with Aruna Roy and many other like-minded civil society people and said, look, this is a fraud on the constitution. You should not misuse the constitutional power of money bill. So he had the courage to do that. And I also recollect in some of his TV interviews with Shekhar Gupta or with Karan Thapar, he spoke his mind fearlessly, without any hesitation and without bothering about the consequences. And what happens is when a person like Fali Nariman spoke, everybody took notice. And unless these big people speak up, speak truth to power, it is a very, very dangerous place for society. But I admired Mr. Nariman on 3 or 4 TV interviews, his articles, he always stood up for what he believed. And lastly, I'll just mention that what Mr. Nariman did was not just practice in court. He wrote excellent articles in Indian Express. In fact, there is a summary of his articles. He has written 7 or 8 articles in the SCC journal. In particular, I would recommend that you read his article called Silences of the Constitution. That's very well written. And a very good tribute he has paid to K.K. Mathew, whom he called the Cardozo of India. So these articles in SCC, if you just now, thanks to the search, you can just put writer of the article, Fali Nariman, and you'll get the opportunity of reading this article. So these are the few important points that I thought I'll highlight to you. It's worth reflecting upon it and trying to imbibe it. And as they say, success leaves clues. If you do the same thing, you're also likely to get the same result. Ultimately, for all youngsters, it's in your hands. You decide where you want to go, and then you work out the path. As somebody told me, if you want to be an Olympic athlete, then it is 18 hours a day. You want to be in the state level, it is 12 hours a day. You want to play district level, it's 2 hours a day. If you read Outliers by Malcolm Gladwell, the 10,000-hour rule is there. But Mr. Nariman, Mr. Palkhiwala, Mr. Sorabji, Ram Jetpalani, all these people I've seen, phenomenal capacity for hard work. And I'm sure that if all of you work today, the bar is such, and I said this on many, many occasions, that today the bar is such, the opportunities are so many, that if you work hard, have a clear strategy, you cannot fail. And I'll conclude by saying that Fali Nariman wrote his book, before memory fades. And the importance of Fali Nariman is this, which I have quoted in Courtroom Genius, when we thought of what to write about Palkhiwala. And this is exactly what Mr. Nariman has done as well. To set a lofty example, is the richest bequest a man can leave behind him. And Mr. Nariman has amply done it. He has set a very lofty example, and it's perhaps the richest bequest he can give to all of us in the legal profession. And I'll conclude by saying that Nariman's autobiography says, before memory fades. And I think that I'll be speaking for all of you when I say that the legacy of this great man ensures that we will never forget him from our memory. Thank you.